Warning. The following video contains spoilers for the inner workings and behind-the-scenes processes of the Project 863 series. If you do not wish to be spoiled on future or past videos, nor have the spell of the series broken, you have been warned.
What's up? What's good? Today, I'm gonna walk you through how we wrote season 1. By the way, I'm Matthias. I'm the showrunner and director of Project 863 if you're new here. I don't usually always say my name with a lisp, but I did just then, so I'm aware of it. Okay, so today I'm gonna kind of walk you through the formulas and structures of how we kind of created season 1. Now, mind you, this formula and structure we're adapting and evolving over time. So already writing season 2 is different and season 3 is way more. We haven't even begun filming that, but as we begin to start writing that, season 3 is going to be even more articulated and specific and honed, I should say. But let's get into season 1, kind of where we started. And I will be honest, I'm not gonna do this with season 0 because we didn't do this with season 0. We straight up were just making videos, video to video to video, and we just kind of naturally landed on some climaxes. So apologies for that. But season 1 is when we started getting a lot more specific about our beats and reversals and moral premise and all of those things that I'm about to get into right here, right now on Behind 863. Okay, so this right here, we're on Miro, by the way, right now. Miro is a tool where you can just create shapes and stickies, and you can pretty much sort things any way you like. And that's pretty cool because we wanted to build something that would allow us to write the story in a cohesive way that we're able to track all the events at the appropriate time. So for instance, don't mind this was just the last climax that just kind of got a little unwieldy. We'll get into it. As you can see here, what we have, for the most part, right here, is called a series grid. For those of you that follow J.K. Rowling, she's one of the ones that use this series grid as well. But there's a book, actually, hold on. There's a book. I know there's a book. I'll find the book. Aha. Aha. Book Architecture. This one's a good read. This one's a very good read. Basically, it kind of goes through the structure of how to, for the most part, build a series grid, right? J.K. Rowling is one of the more prominent writers that has used a series grid before. This is a great example of a series grid. This is actually J.K. Rowling's series grid, how she planned the mystery of Harry Potter. It allows you to track multiple things across an X and Y axis, right? The idea here is that you can set it up however you want. So along the X axis here, right around here, what we have is time. And so as we can kind of get in a little bit closer, you can kind of see how we structured it. So what we have here is, you can see, we have the major story question asked, we have the minor story question asked, we have a refusal, point of no return, we have then wandering beats. For those of you not familiar with story structure, if you're interested in writing, get familiar with story structure. There's so many different kinds of story structures, but they all boil down to the same thing, really. What we use more specifically is we use a combination of the hero's journey and the 7-point plot structure, I think is what it's called. So basically you can do this research on yourself, but you have the hook, you have the plot, you have the pinch point, you have the midpoint, pinch point, plot, and then resolution. I kind of use an amalgamation of, I think, maybe 3 different things: the 3 to 4 act structure, the 7-point plot structure, as well as the hero's journey. I kind of make my own and build them all, and it helps instruct where the character should be and when, and how they should be reacting, and what their motivation is. So I'm definitely a plotter, that's for sure. But as you'll see soon, not just a plotter. I'm like in the middle of plotter and pantser, which I call agile story beats. So we'll get into that too. So I'm gonna boil it down to the most simplistic terms here, which is the 3 to 4 act structure. Why I call it 3 to 4 is because there's technically 3 acts, but you can split the second act right in the half. So basically what you have is, you have the first act, which is establishing the world. You have this giant second act, which is the heroes figuring out what the heck to do the entire time on how to win. And then you have the final act, which is the climax and resolution, okay? So that second act is usually broken down by saying wanderer and then warrior. So act 2A is wander, act 2B is warrior. So act 2A, for the most part, is where your character is still kind of avoidant of really surfacing what the real issue is, but they've committed to attacking it. And at the midpoint, they have this big awareness and this big awakening, this big learning that pushes them more into the warrior phase, which is, okay, now I'm gonna actually attack this problem how it should be attacked, and I'm gonna do my best doing that with more trials and failures. That's what we have there. And so that's kind of the structure that we use here. We have a lot of these different structures, right? We have major pinch point A, wandering, midpoint, attacking, which is like the warrior phase, major pinch point B, attacking, more warrior phase, faux climax, darkest hour, climax, and resolution. So this is the basic structure of how Spellbound creates stories. If you guys would like in the future, what we could do, or I guess what I could do, is to kind of like articulate more specifically about what each of those beats are and how they kind of work together. But right now I'm pretty much just kind of giving you an overview of how we build it. So that's the basic structure. And so how this story writing storyboard series grid thing works is we basically start from the very, very top and work our way down to fill things out. Very much like the snowflake method, if any of you are aware of that, which is basically, well, look it up. I'm not gonna explain more. Look it up if you're interested. Check this out. These three pieces here, I think, are some of the most important pieces of writing a really, really good story, is making sure you're distinguishing between the professional goal, the personal goal, and the private goal of your hero. And so the idea of this is the professional goal is the big issue around that everyone is aware of that's around the hero. Like externally, audience, everyone's aware, like this is the big goal. So obviously, is it choose Cyphus or Deb? Who do we trust? That's the big goal of season 1, of like, we have to pick one, who's it gonna be? The second thing is the personal goal, a smaller issue the hero shares with only a select few, generally minor story question. It's the personal goal, the one that the hero really, really wants to uncover. It's kind of like teetering between conscious and unconscious. Solve why us, find who 863 subjects are. So the idea for season 1 was that the personal goal was why us though? Yeah, I know we have to choose between, let's say Cyphus or Deb, who we thought was Cyphus at the time. Let's say we have to choose between them, but why do we even have to choose at all? We need to understand why we're wrapped up in this, right? The private goal is the innermost issue that the hero must grapple with alone, generally the moral premise of the story. The moral premise, we've talked about that briefly, but the moral premise is basically an equation. I got this from Stan Williams, so I love this. Personally, I feel like this is what makes the story come to life more than anything else. The moral premise. Oh, I've never actually read this. What did I just find here? Did I just find a free book? But yeah, this is a really good read. So check this out. Just search Moral Premise Stan Williams and click the Moral Premise PDF there, because this will tell you everything you need to know. But basically the idea is ensuring that your character starts off with a vice, right? And then ends up choosing the virtue. Otherwise, you're gonna have a really, really dull story. You know what I mean? Like, if your character doesn't actually grow, that's a big issue. A lot of people will try to create a story that just has a character overcoming an obstacle, right? And like trying really hard to do it, and like obstacles getting in their way, but that's not really the heart of story. The heart of story isn't necessarily overcoming obstacles. The heart of story is overcoming obstacles that you have to change, that change your heart from within to overcome them. In my opinion, again, I'm not gonna like outwardly just label what story is, but story to me is that. Story to me is very much about how a human must grow in order to win, because they can't win without the growth, okay? And so the way you bake in this growth is by choosing a vice, let's say that's really, really natural to the problem at hand, and then having them constantly test through wandering and the warrior phase what that virtue feels like, looks like, acts like, behaves like, until ultimately they end up choosing it and have success. The moral premise for us was certainty leads to ignorance and faith leads to wisdom. So in the very beginning, we're all stuck with this idea of certainty, and we have to move towards faith in order to gain the wisdom and the understanding and the awareness of how we're supposed to have success in and what our major story questions are. Generally speaking, the way this ought to work is like a funnel, like a reverse funnel. So the private goal is the first thing that needs to be accomplished. Otherwise, your personal goal and professional goal should not be accomplished. So what that means is it's not until Matthias 863 learns to have faith and to trust instead of leaning on certainty that he will then accomplish the personal and professional goal. So in other words, let's move on to here. Will Matthias and crew find out who to trust, learn how and why him and his crew are involved in the mystery of 863, and learn wisdom comes with faith. So in other words, the final bit of this story here is like how it all comes together is in order for Matthias to learn who to trust, in order for him to find out why they're stuck in Project 863, Matthias 863 must operate with faith and not fear or certainty. You can see we did do that, and I think it was a really impactful climax because of that. Knowing leads to ignorance, but faith leads to wisdom, right? So that's our moral premise. Vice leads to defeat, but virtue leads to success. That's the equation, so to speak. So here's a bunch of other questions that we like to fill out. What's the big sacrifice, right? You can see we brainstormed. All of these are little brainstorming sessions that we kind of get together and we just throw stickies down. What must we give up, usually the vice, in order to gain the virtue? The sacrifice. We must sacrifice all the evidence and information that we have, another physical manifestation of certainty. We sacrifice needing to know why us. And that's actually how we get to know why us. The progressive plot device, this is just something I like to use to kind of like help move the story forward. I think there's another name for it. Basically like objects that kind of help propel the story. It's a bit of a cheat. You know what I mean? Not a MacGyver. What is that called? MacGuffin. I don't know. MacGuffin is a plot device used in films or books that sets the characters into motion and drives the story. A MacGuffin is an object, idea, person, or goal that the characters are either in pursuit of or serves as motivation for their actions. Usually MacGuffin is revealed in the first act. Yes, it is. And you can see the very first act of season 1, the MacGuffin Apple II, was in fact revealed. As you can see, we have under the stairs found. And so that kind of reveals, okay, this is the thing that we need to kind of keep using to help propel the plot forward. That'll also help the characters interface with. It's just a plot device, really. It's not super meaningful. You can make it meaningful by giving it symbolism and motivation. For instance, the Apple II is a computer and it symbolizes certainty for a lot of people. It symbolizes like security and certainty. When you don't know something, what do? You go look it up. You go interface with a computer. Then we have our climax. We must choose between two bad choices, and each is the final choice towards vice or virtue, the faux climax. So this is part of my favorite aspect of story writing. The balance between the climax, the faux climax, that kind of area. So let's kind of jump down into here to talk about that a little bit more, because we've talked about wandering, we've talked about warrior. Now, one of my favorite things to do is the faux climax, because basically the faux climax just means false climax. It's where the audience and the main character really think this is the climax of the story, but then it utterly fails. Everything totally fails. And the reason why things totally fail in the faux climax is because the response that the hero has towards this big event is with the vice, right? And so a great example of how this works more specifically is this thing that I made for our team right here. This is a great example of how you, the character, and the main character kind of navigates through the story with that vice or virtue. So for instance, we start off with the vice, okay? So in season 1, we start off with all this certainty. We're always resting on certainty. And then somewhere around the midpoint, we decide, okay, well, wait a second, maybe certainty isn't all there is. Maybe we should start trying on other ideas here. Maybe we should start trying to have faith. And then that's in the warrior phase when we start committing to like trying to have faith. But as you very well know, whenever you commit to trying to do something, it's a rocky road until you actually figure it out, until you actually learn what the virtue actually looks like and feels like, until you actually have that virtue modeled to you by someone else, right? right? So for instance, if compassion was never modeled to me like anyone else, I'm gonna have a really, really difficult time navigating the complexity of what compassion is until I figure out how to do that in my own life if I don't have a model to show me much more simply what it is. Even if you do have a model, it still can be very difficult. So you can see that's when things start becoming a little bit more volatile, right? So you kind of go up and down through vice and virtue. And as you move through this warrior act, you get like these false positives of the virtue not working because you're too scared. So in other words, what'll end up happening is we lean on faith a little bit, but it's so uncomfortable to lean on faith in the season 1 that we say, you know what, that discomfort that we're feeling must be a sign that faith isn't the right way, instead of actually checking in with the output, the result of having faith, not just the feeling of having faith, which is scary, naturally. That's why the faux climax comes about, because the hero, the audience, will think, okay, this is the opportunity, and then we rest on the vice, and then it utterly fails, because the vice will never work, right? Certainty, attempting to have certainty in this life will never work. I don't care who you are, where you're from, it's just not gonna work. You're just going to end up having a really, really hard life in which you never actually really have certainty, but you strive and strive and strive for this thing that is not possible to have. However, faith is possible to have. Faith is about pushing forward without certainty. And you can actually, to a degree, accomplish that. And that's when we get into the darkest hour, after we rest on that vice and we say, okay, well, everything's failed. We most likely have totally failed and we don't know what to do now. And then that's when the gears start turning and we say, well, wait a second. What if we actually just sacrifice needing this vice at all? What if we actually just straight up sacrificed the one thing we thought we needed, because it's not going to work either way, so we might as well sacrifice. And that's when the hero learns, well, wait a second, that's what was supposed to work all along. Sacrificing the vice. And that's when you get to the climax and the resolution and you swing back upwards. So as you can see, very passionate about this kind of storytelling. Very passionate about it. Then what we do is we come over here and we usually brainstorm a lot. We didn't brainstorm a ton here, but now as we're working towards, let's say, the y-axis, and the x-axis is time and story beats. The y-axis, as you can see here, are themes, objects, goals, characters, and this helps us track when things show up and when they disappear. So for instance, coming back to the series grid, one of the things the series grid is so important for in story writing, especially when you're writing a mystery, is to make sure that things don't drop off the map, right? So for instance, imagine if one of the key characters here was the LAPD officer and they show up and ask for evidence in the very beginning, but then they don't actually appear again until the climax. People would feel like that was a Deus Machina, which is like the hand of God, which is basically saying like, oh, I just fixed the story without actually like making it motivated. So it's like if something were to just come and save me for no reason, right? It ruins the story. What you have to do is you have to make sure that you have all of these beats tracked throughout. So for instance, let's track this LAPD officer line, okay? And what we can do here is we can see that the vertical lines are all the beats that should be in a particular video. So as we're continuing to move on, this is the LAPD officer now showing up a little bit mid-season. And you can see everything in this darker line here. All of these things need to happen in one video. And that allows us to then fully write out this video and kind of like problem solve to get all these pieces to align and to fit so that everything that needs to happen should happen in this video, motivated still by character. And that's what this last piece is. This last piece is, you can see on a much smaller scale, it follows the exact same story structure as the season, right? Which is beginning, pinch point, midpoint, pinch point, climax, resolution, and cliffhanger. And yes, we intentionally do the cliffhangers. I don't know about you, I love cliffhangers. When I watch a show or a movie, I love cliffhangers. Anyone watch Loki? Best cliffhanger of all time. I'm just saying. Love it. Can't wait for it. And so that's basically the overview of how this series grid works and how we basically plot. If you guys want more specifics in one part of this system or process, let me know. By the time we're using season 2 and season 3, like we're using different tools, but the same structure applies. So let me know. Let me know what your thoughts are, how you story write, what you think is appropriate. If you disagree with anything I said, very curious. Love talking shop, which is story, and we'll see you next time.